Morning, everyone. Thanks, Matt, for setting up the panel today. A reminder that we're recording and that will be posted on the website, Matt, at some point. Is that right? And I'm assuming if anyone wants a copy of the recording for themselves, they can have a copy of the recording for themselves. It's a member-only event, so we kind of know everyone who's here. It's not an only event, and for those of you who've been on these before, we try and encourage as much sort of participation and chat as we can. I'm Simon Scott. I'm on the advisory board of MTUK, and for my sins, this is my little project that I'm hoping that I'm starting to initiate. I run a company called Push Entertainment. We do fan technology to the major record companies, and I'm very grateful to have that. Are you the poacher turned gatekeeper, Cliff? Normally you're this side of the equation, asking people questions, aren't you?
I am. It's quite good to be the questionee, questioner.
Yeah. So are you right to just introduce yourself and maybe just, I know that people are aware of you, but in this particular area, just give us like a few sentences on yourself.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Matt, for setting this up, and thanks to all the MTUK crew that have joined us this morning. So for those of you who don't know, my name's Cliff. I wear a couple of hats, or I wear many hats, but a couple of hats that are relevant are I'm a partner at the law firm Silkin, where I've been for the last 19 years now, where I founded the media entertainment team with a focus on digital media way back when. Before that, I spent 5 years at Warner Music and 5 years at Global Radio. So music content being pushed in multi-platform really has always been, my bag. About 11 years ago, which is completely by accident, I decided to set up an advisory firm called 11 because I was really interested in the commercial impact of 3 technologies. My original business model said there are going to be 3 foundational technologies that's going to transform the next decade, which will be AI, blockchain, and immersive entertainment. So said my business plan way back when. And that's been a lot of where I've been spending my time, being an advisor to big incumbent businesses and also a number of scale-ups and startups in the space. And one of my first clients was one of the world's first generative AI music companies, a company called MTUK. But over the years, I've advised to exit a whole bunch of companies like that, and AI Music and Rota, and I'm working with a whole bunch of really interesting companies in the space. So I've been looking at this stuff probably a bit longer than most, but not everyone.
Thank you very much. And this is quite an interesting panel because I know a bit about AI, but I've had to immerse myself and do a lot of research to make sure that I was equipped in order to do this with Cliff. And in doing it, in conversations with Matt, we felt that there's a potential language problem here in terms of what we're talking about, and we all know so we all understand what it is everyone's talking about it when we're talking about it. And we try to distill that down into one question to gauge people's level of the subject matter, and then Cliff and I will try and calibrate our questions and our answers accordingly, which is how many people feel in the room, if happy to do your little hands on Zoom, and then we can do a rough thing. How many people feel comfortable talking about the differences between generative AI and artificial general intelligence? We decided that was the one question that kind of would enable us to understand.
Got a raised hand there from Mike.
Yeah, okay. If we can keep them up. Okay, so we've got about 20% of the room? Yeah, we've got a few people. Yeah, okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to be somewhere intermediate. If there's something that we cover that isn't understood on the language thing, please ask. I know from experience, I'm going to try and see those questions. That's why video is a little bit helpful, because I can kind of gauge a bit how stuff is landing. But please ask. The objective of this is to come away with some learnings rather than just be a panel, really. So please don't feel shy.
No, so I think that's a really important place to start, actually, Simon. Sorry to jump in. You haven't even asked me a question.
No, please.
But yeah. One, this is a safe space. No one is to feel stupid. No one knows everything, especially me, but a lot of the people as well. And actually, uncertainty, hallucinations is actually one of the things that's core when it comes to AI, more generally speaking. And also, people use the certain phrases interchangeably, which doesn't help. You know, generative AI has a very, very specific meaning, which I'm sure we can come to later. And people are now using that as a shorthand for AI-based platforms that use things to generate things. And that isn't what generative AI is, strictly speaking. And also, Simon should point out as well that artificial general intelligence, whilst there's a definition, there isn't an absolute meaning. But artificial general intelligence is the stated aim of certain AI companies, including OpenAI, and that's essentially what you see in science fiction. You know, the machine that can think and reason, you know, and have, you know, kind of a, for any of the sci-fi geeks out there, you know, you're talking about Data, the character, rather than the product set, as it were. But even that, there's all sorts of definitions as to when AGI has or hasn't been met. So we haven't put this isn't being set as a test, but I think it's really important to understand AI as a continuum, and that AI hopefully will become as redundant as a word as digital or internet, or for those of a certain vintage will remember people talking about things like cyber. Often when people use these phrases, they're essentially using these, it's a collective noun rather than a very specific thing. So, you know, and if I slip into bad habits and use things interchangeably, you, Simon, as chair, should pull me up.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, I mean, now you're there, you've explained, you know, AGI. Just really do your 2 sentences on generative AI, then we can level that and not worry about that later on.
Yeah, so generative AI is became very much a kind of again, an understanding. Generative AI in the purest sense is when the computer can code itself and machines can start talking to each other of their own volition in a way that, you know, didn't happen before. But unfortunately, you know, well, not unfortunately, that often gets conflated with AI that generates stuff. So lots of people in the music industry will say, oh, we have to ban generative AI. So, well, good luck with that, because unfortunately that's already nailed.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. So what are the buckets? So if you can kind of like, let's sort of like start at a high level and go within the music industry, what AI use cases are you seeing right now? If you could just talk about that for a bit and try and we'll dive down into some color.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you listen to the heat and light of, you know, headlines on Music Ally or Music Business Worldwide or in the main press, etc., all of the heat and light has come from AI platforms that generate music, right? So you're talking about your Sunos, your Udios, but way back when, to your Duke Decks, to your Boomies, to your Avas, etc. So it isn't a particularly new sort of use case, as it were. What is becoming more and more controversial is the learning set. I'm sure we'll come to that in a bit. But actually, I think that, you know, this industry doesn't have a great relationship when it comes to new technologies, and it can be quite, you know, begin to other them. So back when I was at Warner Music in the 90s, not only did a memo go around saying it's a firing offense to access the internet. You know, when I have to explain that to students, they laugh. But similar memos are flying around the labels about ChatGPT, by the way. So, you know, they say that history is doomed to repeat itself rather than people learning from that. But also that it was a firing offense to work with any company that uses MP3, right? And it was just a codec. Now, there were illegal uses of that codec, but what the industry wasn't able to do was bifurcate the idea of the legal use of a tool and the use of a tool. So there's lots of heat and light around, you know, platforms that can generate music and prompts, and I'm sure we will come back to that, because what's clear is that that's something that the public loves. But how AI is being used right now is because a whole series of horizontals. So music recognition technologies, fingerprinting technologies, helping to understand metadata, moods, playlists, track detection, matching fans and audiences, advertising, virtual instruments, mastering. A lot of AI mastering that's going on right now. You know, it's almost simpler to list the areas where AI isn't being used. And I think that, to me, I've always found those other uses, you know, much more interesting, you know, intellectually, as a non-ambulance chasing lawyer, I'm much more interested in the use cases for those new technologies. And of course, really what we want to talk about today, which I think is about the new business models that can emerge from that. That's what I'm really interested, but we will come to that.
Exactly.
But I think that my short answer to that, Simon, is that if you look, the danger, the failure for me is the music industry sees the AI as the problem. I think AI-based technologies offer a whole bunch of solutions to some of the biggest problems our industry has today.
So let's pick on that then, and then I'd really like to go. Let's talk about some of the companies that are operating today, that are generating revenue, that are working with the music industry in some way. And I'd like, in the first instance, to get into those company names, what they do, how they earn their money. Yeah. And then I'd sort of like to understand how they interface with the music industry. Yeah. What rights do they need to interface? What does that look like? Just really just talk that through, because there are some people, there's loads of people not doing stuff. And by that, I mean, they're inventing the product stage, and we're going to change the world in a variety of different ways. Everyone on this call is kind of like somewhere on that journey. But there are some people who are through the gate using the technologies, generating revenue. Can we talk about some of those specifically, and share how they're making their model, how they've got an interface with the record companies or the music companies?
Well, let's break that down, because again, you've fallen into the classic track, Simon, and I'm very disappointed of you, of conflating the record business, the three majors.
Yeah. As I said it, I realised that was coming.
Well, look, let's start at the other end of the. Let's start at the other end. Let's talk about the most successful, profitable, highly capitalized businesses in our industry, right? So TikTok acquires Duke Deck. And not only does it buy that functionality, it buys its understanding, and that formed the basis of its music brain. Spotify transformed itself about 9 years ago with the acquisition of a couple of businesses. One, Sonalytic, which had an acoustic understanding algorithm, and the acquisition of businesses of The Econist, which essentially used algorithms in order to give people the best outcomes. You've got SoundCloud acquiring Museo. You've got Rota being acquired by businesses like Lyric Find. So what you're finding, and this is one of the things that I often say to the record business. Oh, these companies. Well, all the companies that make you money are using these tools, right? And you like this, and therefore you might like that, which goes all the way back to Amazon. The biggest companies on the planet are AI powered. Apple, Google, Facebook, TikTok, all of these companies are AI powered and algorithmically powered. And maybe it's just a massive coincidence, or they've understood that in order to personalize, adapt, monetize, give people what they want in a way, using AI-based technologies are all the way there. Businesses like AI Music acquired by Apple, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of these companies, and I know that a lot of those companies, because I work with a lot of them, tried working with a record business and were told that, I'm sorry, we can't.
So are you saying that those businesses are bringing value to the broader industry, but they're free to the point where they've got any sort of license agreement with rights holders? Would that be a fair categorization of those businesses, or do any of those have, do they have within there, which of those have got existing licenses, and what have they got licensed? You're
careful. You're asking a different question there.
Okay.
None of those businesses were reliant upon getting licenses from third parties, and virtually none of the AI-based businesses out there in the world have entered into long-form term comprehensive licensing issues. So that's very much future facing. But all I'm saying is that, I know all of those businesses, or many of those businesses, tried to get those licenses and were rebuffed and then acquired by some of the biggest companies on the planet. So I'm gently inviting people to understand that, often if your entire business is focused upon, three major labels, that isn't probably the best way forward. But it doesn't mean that your technology can't be transformational, useful, etc., etc., etc. Now we are seeing lots of different rights holders, and there's stuff I can talk about openly and not. So I'll try and remain on the right side.
I was going to actually, Cliff, just before we get into rights holders, there's two people asked at the same time to ask some questions there. Maybe we can just take a couple of comments from the audience on that point. There was, is it Radhika and Ben? You had a couple of questions. You both came up at about the same time.
Also, Toby, I think, has got a question.
And Toby got his hand up as well. Yeah, I don't know. Radhika, do you want to fire away?
I think that some of those hands were up from when you were talking about AGI, by the way.
Oh, were they? Oh, did they?
Yeah,
oh, they just popped up. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry if that's the case. Yeah, they just appeared.
But I think,
yeah, sure, Toby.
I think possibly Toby is.
I want to speak to Cliff's point just there. He said that these companies attempted previously to get these licenses from the major record labels, and it didn't go so well. So what was the alternative? Without access to that catalog, they go and get, Creative Commons licensed music. Did they create their own music in-house? How did they?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, is the short answer. Many of them were on public domain works, many of them on Creative Commons. Some of them did licenses with production music catalogs or classical music catalogs that slipped into public domain, etc., in order to demonstrate and prove the use cases. But also, it's the near, it's a big bright flame, so therefore it's going to attract all of the people towards it that major labels. This industry is vast. There's a whole world of beats, there's a whole world of different genre, there's a whole world of other kind of rights holders out there, and I'm approached, I would easily weekly, by a new company that says, can you help me do a deal with a record label? And I just sort of gently explain, is that the place you want to start?
Yeah.
And many people walk away from the room physically or actually shaking their heads, going, he's no idea what they're on about. And anyway.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. So you were just about to get into really, I think we should now get into that second group that you referred to, and let's call those the AI prompt engineering companies. Yeah, which, as you say, is the most controversial right now. Could we just talk about the challenges that they face, the challenges that new entrants face, sort of paint a picture of where we are now in that overall licensing question?
Well, look, I mean, there's a number of challenges going on. I think that, is there a world where people want to adapt, play with music, personalize it, be able to do sorts of things with it as well? I would say absolutely, right? And the same way that people can do in relation to text, in the way they can do in relation to photography. If you were to explain Instagram to photographer friends of mine 20 years ago, as I often do, the idea that people could have a device in their hands with a Carl Zeiss lens on it and have the ability to be able to edit it, print it, publish it around the world, that have said that was ridiculous. So the idea that users want the ability to be able to do all of that stuff is there. But let's just work by analogy. For example, a platform like Instagram is based upon matching people to the content that they want, matching advertisers, personalizing, having tools for personalization, tools for distribution, etc. So a lot of that depends on data, that depends on object recognition. It comes in relation to essentially being able to change the elements of etc., and also based on imperfect licensing. Instagram is now a licensed platform. It's done a deal with the majors in relation to short form clips in the background. There's a value exchange and there's an ability to be able to do that. It's imperfect, but it's a good place and it understands the rights for rights holders. So in the same way that has happened for imagery, the way it's happened in relation to video, logic alone will dictate that something similar needs to happen in the world of music. Now, whether or not someone wants to press a button and create a brand new track out of thin air, has a long-term one, I genuinely don't know. And I'm not saying that I query the business model, etc. I genuinely don't know if that's what the market wants. But the ability to adapt, share, change, remix, re-up, just look at TikTok. Just look at the vast amounts of people wanting to not just play music but play with music, the ability to personalize, create stickers, etc. The visual, sorry, the audio equivalent of GIFs, etc. That is a behavior I don't think is going to go anywhere, and remains at the moment unmonetized.
Did you see what Billie Eilish did with her recent record? Where they released the stems and they've done sped up and slowed down versions of the tracks that people can get if they buy a digital version of the album from her site.
I mean,
Yeah,
sped up version of tracks, depending on how old you are, that goes back to Pinky and Perky or Alvin and the Chipmunks, depending on what thing you're at. The idea that would be the number one thing that was consumed on a platform would have been ridiculous. But that's what people want. And, I have to quote my friend Benji Rogers, as I have to do in most talks, actually. But he says the biggest issue with the music industry is it tries to give people what they have rather than what they actually want. So what you're seeing at the moment is you're seeing licensing on their own terms for reasons I understand. I do not need copyright explained to me. I do not need artist contracts explained to me, nor do I need to explain how major labels work. And I'm not having a go. They have, they have certain constrictions. They have certain artist rights. They have an entire business model. They have every right to protect and amend. But what we do need to do is move to a world where actually we can stop allowing perfection to be the enemy of good and start doing things. Now, to Universal's credit, they've done a deal with Endel, for example, and this is all that they've spoken about publicly.
And Endel, can you explain what Endel does?
I was about to, Simon.
Thank you.
So Endel is a generative AI music platform using mainly public domain and/or classical works. And because of the nature of the content that their model is trained on, it's actually quite good for what people might call background music or music for spas or wellness or whatever. And I'm not being in any way dismissive. That's a very big, use case, as it were. So you are seeing the early days of major labels and or major rights holders working with those platforms to look at functional music, more commercial music, more contextual music, which I think is a good place for everyone to start. I wish it had happened earlier, but those sorts of things are happening. You're also seeing experiments. Again, most of them have been with Universal. Now, Universal cops a lot of grief about a lot of things, but actually they're really quite innovative in the bounds with which they can work. They've been collaborating with YouTube on this Dream Track model, where they've gone to work with artists who have allowed themselves to have their voices and or music trained on. So I think Charlie Puth is probably one of the biggest names that they've got for the Dream Track experiment, where you can go in and say, make me a Charlie Puth song in a Sunny Day style. And you can put different prompts and it will create tracks based on a certain genre. So we're starting to see the first baby steps happen in order to do that. But to be
fair, am I right in thinking so? Sorry, go on.
But
just,
to be fair to the labels, they have to deal with artist contracts and they have to deal with the rights in relation to the underlying composition. And and that's as much of a hassle for Universal as it is for anyone on this call. So, there's a lot of, why can't they just get the right? They can't. They just can't. So they are necessarily working within the confines that they can for as long as the technologies aren't there in order to be able to do those sorts of deals.
Yeah. So they're handcrafting a business model at the moment to understand the art of the possible. Is that what's really going on there?
Yeah,
so we can kind of look at that and we can go, they're sort of experimenting there to see what works in the safety of a big partner like YouTube.
Yeah, but at the same time, you are seeing certain models out there, and I won't name who they are, but everyone will know who they are, who are barely concealing that, they've built models trained on their works, and they have to and should defend their rights. In relation.
Okay, I want to sort of like get into that now and go through the journey from sort of like what's kind of going on with those companies that are being sued. What do you think the industry response will be? What that means about copyright? I want to go down that journey. I want to make one sort of observation before I got there. For me, before I started doing my research, I was sort of like going, everything's out of the bag, the genie's out of the bottle, nothing can be put back, the whole thing is doomed. Yeah. And then in terms of like protecting people's copyright, and then I went on one of my, I don't know, a podcast that I was listening to about called training data. And the guy was explaining that each time there's a new AI frontier model, they have to retrain on the content to basically take advantage of those new features. So I'm going, oh, hang on a minute, there is a fire break. And the fire break is if the industry gets a handle of how it wants to have a licensing model. Yeah. If people, the functionality of people's products is going to be stuck. It's going to be stuck where it is unless they get a license. So I can see that that is on the horizon in some way. There's a technological limitation to what it can do. So how do we get kind of where we are through the licensing, through that, and what do you think it looks like in terms of the future licensing models?
Well,
it's a really broad question there.
Well, and very, very narrow as well. Look, I think, you know, I can't and won't comment on the different models that are out there because those are proprietary, mystery, and when you drill into some of these clients as well, even they don't know what they're doing, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not going to pretend that I know what they're doing. But I think the big myth that we all need to contend with is that copyright or licensing or deals is somehow as sort of technologically certain or perfect as technology is. So ignore everything we've talked about today and let's talk about a company like PPL or PRS, right? These collect monies from performing rights, and you know, PRS has done it for, you know, over a century, and PPL has done it for nearly a century. It's done it for 90 years. Music's played in the background in bars and cafes. Someone sat in a tea house in 1929 and thinks, wonder who's getting paid on that. You know, and PPL is born in order to be able to do that, right? What happens is that you set up a licensing model and a licensing framework that recognizes the right, applies a tariff, and then in an imperfect but highly pragmatic way distributes the value. That's not a million miles away from the deals that most of the social networks have done with the labels and publishers, or that YouTube has done in relation to content ID, etc., etc., etc. So I see people diving right in to creating, you know, this perfect machine that's going to have this perfect metadata engine, or, you know, it's going to be based on Web3, or it's going to be based on some mystical technology that's going to do on a pixel by pixel basis attribution. We may get there, and anything that can speed up the journey to that could be there as well. But really, we need to be thinking much, much more about just getting certain foundational rights in place, and also understanding what are the use cases we want to license and what are the use cases we don't want to license. And we being the industry rather than, you know, the technologists.
So do you have can you talk a bit about what you think those foundational rights might be, and a bit about the use cases?
Yeah, well, again, I mean, look, like all of these things, one, you have to recognize the right. So, you know, YouTube spent a good 6 years denying it had to pay anything. I'm not being in any way, shape, or form defamatory. They just did. They, you know, safe harbor, safe harbor, safe harbor. We don't have to pay anything. And Robert Kinsel's talked about this publicly. We had a choice. We could have either carried on and doubled down on that, or we could actually say we want to partner with the content business, find ways to pay people and share value. You know, in 2010, you know, YouTube shared a lot if you were a YouTuber and nothing if you were a rights holder.
Yeah.
But now, by spreading the value, creating an opportunity to be able to do, you know, operating on an exemption model rather than not, etc., built something, content ID, which is not perfect, but it works. And, you know, it's not perfect, but it's worked. And they've built new businesses, including subscription models, YouTube Red, you know, sort of Roku type offering in the US, etc. What has happened is by doing a partnership, it's been able to innovate and grow and develop.
And is that a part that, oh, sorry, go on. Yeah, go on.
But, you know, that is using Silkin technologies in order to be able to understand metadata, understand content ID, having the opportunity to recognize things that upload, building an opportunity to be able to measure the value. So you know, YouTube doesn't magic that up. It has to work really, really hard using a whole series of technologies that can create attribution and or abilities to be able to be able to do that. And then, of course, you've got third-party businesses, some of which are on this call, that can help at the point of upload, that has the opportunity to be able to, you know, screen out things, not perfectly, but anything that's obvious. And also as well, you know, for a very long time, it used human beings for moderation.
Yeah.
You know,
So-
and still to this day still does. And a lot, I think one of the things that people don't understand is how manual a lot of that screening on all of the social platforms remains to this day.
I'd a bit of a basic question and something that I don't probably understand. So is the YouTube relationship, is that a business commercial relationship that uses existing licenses? Is that a business commercial relationship that caused new licenses, general licenses to be born? What does that look like?
Well, look, I mean, you know,
or is that a non-question? I mean, that might be a non-question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it assumes that YouTube was planned rather than grown.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
YouTube started as an upload platform. I believe the first video was of a panda. You know,
Yeah.
So the idea that, you know, it would spawn Cobra Kai or PewDiePie was not in anyone's contemplation
Yeah.
at the point it was there. It was essentially a video sharing platform in order to be able to do that. But then it grew and it grew and it grew. I mean, one of my favorite stats is, do you know what percentage of 18 to 34s use YouTube? It's 100%. I mean, that's quite a
Really?
stat.
Really? Wow.
That's
Okay.
quite a stat, right?
So that's yeah. Okay.
But
So it's
again,
like,
if YouTube had been shut down,
yeah.
you know, I mean, the IFPI, quite infamously in 2007, the then CEO of IFPI, John Kennedy, described YouTube as an engine of copyright theft.
Yeah. So really, you've the money begets the business relationship, begets the license. Kind of like it's kind of like yeah. Okay.
Yeah, well, it's you know,
yeah.
I mean, when I you know, often when I'm doing talks, you know, somewhere in, you know, normally somewhere like France, you know, they'll say, is it possible that the technology could come before the copyright or the licensing? It's like, it's only ever worked that way around, you know. And if you are a nerd like I am, if you look at the conversations at the birth of television or the birth of radio or the birth of amplified technologies, microphone, even the sousaphone, have a guess. Spoiler alert, all the responses are the same. It's the death of orchestras, it's the death of creativity, it's the death of this and it's death of that. And I have had, you know, interesting and quite intricate arguments that I always win, explaining that a piano is music tech and a guitar is music tech. So technology always comes first. And then always you end up with a licensing model from that. You know, copyright is nothing but a 250-year late response to the printing press. So it always happens in this particular way. So what has to happen is you get something like the printing press that comes along. It completely changes everything. It changes religion, it changes education, it understands government, it understands knowledge, you know. And I think, you know, AI is up there with printing or steam or electricity in terms of what it will do to business models. So it's going to spawn new business models, but what needs to happen is that you need to be able to then, right, okay, how do we effectuate this in a way that recognizes rights, recompenses rights, has the ability for people to be able to make money? Because if people don't have any of those opportunities, then it falls away. You know, the one thing I would say to lots of tech bros that I meet is that they're all about trademarks, they're all about patents, they're all about design rights, they're all about they're out of the proprietary algorithms, but copyright's meaningless. And it's like, well, that seems a little bit convenient and selective to me.
So does that mean that copyright isn't fit for purpose anymore? Is that an overwhelming wave?
Copyright is one of the most extensible, flexible, pragmatic things. You know, the thing about law is it's not a law of nature and not a law of God. It's not a law of science. It's a law of people, and all the time it's immensely flexible. What needs to happen, you know, and again, it's projects as well. If the law can clarify these technologies, which, you know, so for example, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in America, that was born of the fact that if you were a cable provider, you didn't have liability just because a movie went down your pipes. All right, so it was to protect pipes, but those pipes became platforms, right? So that's when platforms like YouTube and SoundCloud came up. There was this question: oh, we can rely on the DMCA in order for safe harbor because we're just the platforms. You're not a pipe. You're not a pipe. You are something else. So new platforms will come along, and they just need to be clarified that technology couldn't possibly have envisaged. That's where we are with regard to AI.
I wondered actually. There's a couple of, well, we've got one hand raised, and maybe we could ask if there's any questions.
Yeah, let's do that, and then we've got
Toby, I think there's a question from you first.
Again, I wanted to ask if you, so obviously platforms like SoundCloud, Instagram, TikTok have some level of protections as a UGC platform. Do you think some of these new generative platforms that are coming about will have the ability to rely on these existing UGC protections, or do you think it's fundamentally a much different use case?
Totally different use case.
Okay.
Totally different use case. You know, training on copyrighted materials versus a platform where people can upload and, you know, rights holders can set up are two different things.
I think the use case I'm more talking about is, for example, a platform which allows users to train their own models without the intervention of the platform operators itself. So a user coming to the platform, training their own model and using it for their own use case, does that potentially have any UGC protections in the same way that a SoundCloud or a Instagram? No,
I didn't see that. No. And SoundCloud is a licensed platform, right, and has licenses with third-party rights holders. Actually, some of the most interesting and innovative ones as well.
That's true. They have an interesting model where there's a UGC section where a bunch of people are uploading mashups and whatnot. But if you then want to go and generate revenue, you have to go and make sure that it's clear. I did want to follow up to that as well. Do you think that we're going to need some drastically new legal frameworks to address a lot of the issues or worries that are going on in the generative space, or do you think we can rely on, for example, music sampling frameworks? Some people see generative AI as just the next level of music sampling. You could previously sample 1 or 2 tracks, now you can sample 1,000 tracks at the same time with the help of AI.
Well, there aren't any sampling frameworks, just to be clear. You know, what happened is the music industry, and again, people are conflating and you know, sort of mashing up concepts, as it were, that are entirely different. You know, when Nile Rodgers first heard, you know, Rapper's Delight, he had a choice. He could have had the thing shut down, or, you know, he decided to do a license and made a ton more money and invented an entirely new genre.
Right.
You know, so what happens is that, you know, you get to a world where people say, well, you couldn't possibly have multiple owners of a composition. So that's literally how publishing works. And actually what we need to do is be able to take the industry back to where it is. So, you know, when I worked with Duke Deck, took them to all the major labels. One of the major labels said, making sound recordings at scale isn't our business model. To which, you know, I literally did a comedy double take. I worked in another business called AI Music, which had adaptive AI. And I presented them at a conference, and a lady from publishing stood up. So, I'm sorry, making multiple versions, multiple recordings of our composition isn't our business model. I said, it's literally your business model. You've just forgotten. And then you get a world where you say, well, you can't possibly mash up, you can't possibly this, you can't possibly that. All of these things are possible. However, those things are licensed. Those things are licensed. And, you know, they're really quite difficult to do. You know, I mean, you saw as well, and again, a lot of it is because of licensing frameworks, but people wanted to be able to capture value. So there are ways. I just think in a number of ways, people have sort of forgotten what they're there for. And I think one of the things that's going to be an interesting opportunity and challenge for the record business is, releasing frontline music is becoming more and more risky. It's having a higher failure rate. And one of the majors said to me the other day, "Oh, we're now a shallow catalog business, Cliff." Oh, right, not deep catalog. Okay, right. So if you're going to move into a sort of catalog-based thinking, you have to think a bit more like a publisher. Old school publisher is finding as many ways to use your tracks, your songs, and new ways as possible to generate and essentially monetize your portfolio. That's a model that the entire record and publishing business need to go into. But they're saying, quite rightly, you need consent, we need control, we need credit, we need compensation, right? Those are the things that they're all pushing for. And I think they've got every right to do that. So in order to be able to enable that, guess what? Technologies can help with those things in order to help build frameworks that could be able to find that sort of value.
And what would be the key elements of those frameworks? What I'm going to try and do is I've got 3 questions that I think that will close it off, and then let's leave the last sort of like 10, 15 minutes for questions really, because I think I might cover some of the things. What are going to be the elements of those frameworks that you just described?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think there needs to be some way to opt out. I think there needs to be some way to be able to credit and or for there to be attribution. I think there need to be ways of being able to share value, which, if Ed Sheeran does a song with Beyonce, there is a deal done. You check with Ed, you check with Beyonce, then you do a deal between the labels, then they have a conversation with regard to the publishing. If there's a way that thing could be made more efficient, that's great. But, in the first instance, it's going to have to happen by consent. I know a lot of technology companies would like to have this magical world where all of this stuff gets agreed in the background, but that's just not the way that the world works. And frankly, nor should it. If this was your stuff or your house or your property that people were dealing with, as I often have to say to people, you'd be a lot more circumspect. And so there needs to be a sort of an understanding of that. So technologies that help with that detection, attribution, building new business model cases, as it were, are probably the most interesting to the industry right now. What we need to be doing is applying these technologies to empower licensing rather than do the usual kind of, Jedi mind trick of, oh, it's fair use, oh, it's transformative, oh, it's public domain. Oh, the arguments that I've seen in recent defenses look remarkably similar to ones that have been deployed in the past to total failure.
Yeah, okay. And
going back to your point on consent there, interestingly, one of the reasons that, from what I've heard, for record label, getting their master recording rights is to allow them to easily exploit this catalog and place it in, for example, sync in a movie or in some commercial without having to explicitly go and get permission from the artist. Do you think there's a big difference between placing a song in a big movie on behalf of the artist and placing their song in some training data?
I haven't seen a deal with a major label in 30 years where the artist didn't get to approve something like that.
Yeah.
And those contracts cannot be hand waved away. I was meeting with someone who's placed a lot of money in one of these companies that's in the fire. Oh yeah, the labels will give us the rights. I'm not sure the labels have got the rights to give. Under the artist contracts that I know, as it were, I don't think they've got those rights without consent. I don't think they've got the rights without being able to do that. Let alone
that you've seen recently.
Sorry,
not in the contracts that you've seen, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Or do you think this goes across the board?
I think it goes across the board.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you think there's no need for new legislation, why do you think that?
I didn't say there was no need for new legislation. I said there was no need to replace copyright.
Right.
So my question earlier was, do you feel like we need some new legal frameworks? And you said, no, we just need to remember how copyright works and apply that, right?
Again, it depends on what you mean by legal frameworks. I know what I meant, so so apologies if it didn't come out correctly.
No
there are lots of people who say we copyright fit for purpose, etc., etc. No, some clarity around large language models. So, for example, 18 months ago, you know, the kakistocracy that was in charge decided that they wanted to unleash our Brexit freedoms by allowing anyone to train on any any information that they wanted, and then relatively quickly they said, oh no, there should be no text and data mining exploitation, etc., etc. But just having an explicit understanding with regard to large language models would be helpful. Understanding name and likeness rights would be helpful. Those sorts of things are tweaks; they're not fundamental.
Thank you, Cliff. So I think I'm going to summarize that. We've got, when we look at this in the past, the use cases that are generating the revenue have dictated where the licensing models are going to be resolved to create a sort of like a marketplace of value. Yeah, which would seem to be, that's a repeat thing that's kind of happened. So if I gave you $20 million, yeah, what would you do now with that in terms of like, and I put a high sum of money because I think AI, everything I read, it needs a lot of money if you're building a business based on that. What are the top problems you would try and solve or value that you create? You know, where would you go?
Well, look, I mean, again, I think that the attribution, detection, helping to create new models is really, really interesting. But what I wouldn't do is do what all startups do, right? You know, all startups, you know, they approach a major and they say, oh, could I possibly have Beyonce and Ed Sheeran and Taylor Swift? Like, why would you start there? Why would you not go to Splice or Native Instruments? Or why would you not go to production music catalogs? Or why would you not go to Epidemic Sounds? Why would you not go to Beatport? Why would you not go to people who have the rights to give, who have got an inclination where you could be helpful to them? Secondly, I think there are whole new marketplaces of value which go beyond, you know, original commercially released master recordings. So they could be versions, they could be dubs, they could be translations, they could be cover versions. All of these other ones, you know, why do you want to go to them and ask for their, you know, crown jewels every time and wonder why it's locked behind glass? You know, it's just not the place to start. You know, majors have got, you know, publishers have got karaoke catalogs. I'm also really interested in opening new markets, you know, so away from music, I'm working with various voice AI companies. This is, you know, for translation, versioning, podcasts, audio books, etc., etc. We're seeing whole new marketplaces open up for voice marketplaces in a way that you can buy a voice and be able to apply that and use it in your adverts for it to be personalized and done as well. And technologies that can help with personalization for that, you know, so start with the stuff you can do rather than try and solve the things that you can't. And, you know, that's what we did with the likes of AI Music. That was a business where boy, did we go and see every superstar and they absolutely loved it. But even they, who controlled both sides, couldn't clear all the rights. So we started essentially in advertising, and we started working with advertisers who used their own music, proved the use case, and then the business was acquired by one of the biggest companies on the planet. So a lot of the time, and it's something I have to say over the time, is start with things you can work with rather than try to, reverse the polarity in sci-fi language.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I think what we'll do is we've got some questions from Rob, who's been waiting patiently, and then like to open the floor up for sort of like, you know, the remaining 9 minutes that we've got for anything else that anyone else would like to ask.
I wanted to get back to kind of what Toby was saying about how platforms are going to, like, how are they going to be different from AI and for AI platforms versus something like YouTube? And from what I understand, YouTube gets given DMCA protection because it's a passive host, whereas AI is active. Is that where the battleground is for these kind of platforms, or is it?
I just don't think you're comparing like with like. You know, comparing YouTube is like comparing telly with YouTube. Just because it has visual stuff, it has completely different rights, it has completely different regulation, it has completely different whatever. So I personally, I'm not seeing why you would compare YouTube with, you know, an AI-based music generation platforms. I just think they're two completely different species. The reason I mention YouTube is that YouTube started as one thing and then through innovative licensing has grown into this whole nother thing, which demonstrates value and reach and clearly giving people what they want. Oh, and by the way, the reason why it's so addictive is it uses algorithms to ensure that you get to see the content that you want.
So with YouTube,
YouTube's
can
not
take that money.
generating any content. They're not creating content.
Yeah, so
They're funding some
that's
content. It's the essential difference.
that is the difference. Yeah, yeah.
Andrew, thank you.
Yeah, hi. Really good to see everyone. Really good to see you, Cliff. I just wanted to raise a couple of things. One is, well, first, I'd be one of the people arguing that copyright is not fit for purpose, but in its current the way that it's written into law at present doesn't recognize the shifting nature of the technologies. And I think that, Cliff, you and I have spoken about that at length, so I'm not going to rehearse that here. But it's interesting that we've started with, oh, this is not just about AI trained on music catalog, and then we've spent 90% of the time talking about exactly that, and particularly the 3 record labels of the thousands and thousands in the world who have a problem with that. But one of the things I wanted to pick up on is this idea that you said we always start from the technologies, which is absolutely true, 100% with you on that. And then the licenses can be agreed from that. But what most people don't think is that the third part of the chain is what the rights are. There are no sort of fundamental natural rights that anybody has to start with. And we're kind of making this stuff up as we go along. It's all discursive and it's all agreed and it's all different wherever you happen to be in the world. If you're in Britain or if you're in Europe or if you're in, the US or anywhere else in the world. But that copyright is not, I mean, it's weird because it's not a right and it's not about copying. It's just a bunch of rules that we've got in order to sort of put in place these agreements that we have about what seems fair or what sort of territory has been grabbed by the various players in there. And I think that you're right, when these technologies do shift and then we do agree these licenses, that shapes what rights are. There's sort of, we don't start with, well, obviously ownership is this, and obviously a composer gets that, and obviously, somebody who has done the publishing should have the other, because the framework and the platforms and the methodologies and the technologies behind them are all so different. What the rights even are in the first place is completely up in the air and completely up for grabs. And I thought, is there a way that we can sort of orientate ourselves and anchor ourselves? Are there things that we can rely on as, wherever we are in the chain, what things are always true, Cliff? Would be my question, I guess.
Well, I mean, there's a lot there, and unless anyone's having trouble speaking, I won't go into a long conversation about jurisprudence. But I mean, from memory, I think there's 178 signatories to the Berne Convention on Copyright, which is, only 20 countries in the world don't recognize copyright and the fundaments of copyright. And I don't see that changing anytime soon, nor do I see it why it should. I think I'm much more interested personally, and again, we have been there, is finding new, imperfect, but pragmatic business models that can be empowered in order to allow many flowers to bloom. I've just never been one of these people who, there are still people in Europe who get very, very upset as to how much of a mechanical element is there in a stream, by how much is a performing right element in the stream. Personally, I couldn't give a rat's arse, right? What I want to make sure is that there's actually proper and fair and equitable compensation with regard to that. So I don't think, the idea of sort of reinventing copyright, etc., is necessarily there, because otherwise, genuinely speaking, the content that, if copyrighted content wasn't so important, why does everyone want to steal it?
Yeah, it's the first principles I'm trying to get at. What are the things that copyright's trying to achieve?
Yeah, it's about
how well is it doing that, I guess, is the question.
It's doing extraordinarily well, because it's the foundations of patents, it's the foundation of trademarks, it's the foundation of literally, the creative industries and the value of intellectual property versus real property. One is in billions, the other one's in trillions. And as I said earlier, people are all about copyright rights, database rights, the rights to their algorithms, etc., until it's not theirs, and at which point some of them want to conveniently hand wave them away. So I'm a fundamental believer in relation to those rights. What I do think they need to be is exercised and applied pragmatically. If you can demonstrate to the rights holders, to the societies, etc., a value, then it's great. I often say to startups, and won't be the first time some of you have heard this, is that you get put in one of two buckets. Are you a maker or are you a taker? Right? And businesses that are makers tend to thrive. Takers, I want all of your rights and basically want to rely on some kind of, convenient exception, as it were. They'll be takers, and they'll do everything they can to shut you down. So be a maker, create, demonstrate, and deliver value. Would be my view on
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you. Brilliant
Thank
as
you.
always. Thank you, Chris.
Michael, I've got Michael, John, then Toby. We've got 3 minutes.
All right, I'll be quick with this one, I guess.
Thank you.
So when we're looking at, I guess the tech, then the license, what I've seen quite a bit is there's tech gray area where there's an acceptable gray area for them to operate until is no longer acceptable, and then the license gets created. When we talk about YouTube and its development and to become the ecosystem that it is now, is the music industry hindering itself in that development by allowing these gray areas to exist? Because once you have a gray area, nothing is really understood, and if you were to approach these gray areas quicker and say get to that license point faster, we can then start to actually develop how the music industry interacts with emerging technologies.
In principle, yes, but in reality, lots of people have got a different definition of that grey area, Michael. I know this sounds trite, but it's what one person's grey area is another person's workaround, is another person's, sort of get out of jail free card, really. But the beauty of knowledge is curiosity and misunderstanding. Where these creative AI businesses come in is the ability to hallucinate and have uncertainty. There's nothing wrong with uncertainty. There's nothing wrong with not knowing those things. The real question is what's going to come out of it. And I think there's an opportunity there, I think, to actually demonstrate value rather than having fairly impossible arguments as to whether or not something's right or fair or whatever. Because that's 4 years of jurisprudence course, which isn't going to get anyone forward.
Thank you. And John, you had a question?
Hey everyone. It's the first time I turned my camera on today. It's terrible. So I'm going to ask more or less the same question as Michael and Dubber. Hey Dubber. Which is, so I've been involved in this conversation around where technology companies rub up against rights holders in various ways over the years. And I think it's a privileged position to be able to stand back and go, all of the blood lost and all the money lost amongst all the people attempting to push the vanguard. And when you're in the middle of that, and you're one of the companies trying to obtain licenses, understand where the grey areas are, it looks very different to that of a spectator. So the question here is, have you got any practical advice for companies trying to navigate through that, trying to not lose blood? And second question is, have you got any ideas for startups, startup ideas for people to solve that and reduce the friction and make that process a lot easier?
Well, John, this is a conversation you and I have had over many, 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 many years, including when you used to work for one of those majors as well. Look, the issue is that you often have to go and prove your use case outside of the industry or using content that you can do it. So, again, as I said, I wouldn't necessarily, the way to bring anyone to a standstill at any major label conference is ask when was the last startup fully licensed by all majors and all the major publishers, and the room will go very, very quiet. And also that has obligations. Universal announced its figures yesterday, and various analyst reports were saying, it's a bit soft, really. So we're not sure about the churn on these services. So we need more flowers to bloom. We need more services. We need more use cases. Everyone needs to be able to do that. But you have to, I think, work with what you can rather than what you can't, which isn't me being trite. So my first one is I wouldn't start with a major, and that's nothing personal. I'd prove the use case outside of it. And then when you can show them that there's a deal worthwhile and you've been able to show some product market fit, it's much easier to then transfer to that than not. And then two, with regard to, you know, people have said, oh, we can have a licensing matching platform. That's not the issue. That's not the issue. If you can show someone an attribution model or demonstrate you've got an ability to be able to detect content, or you've got the ability to be able to license it, you know, there are really, really interesting businesses out there. There are really interesting businesses on this call. It's Audible Magic and Orpheum and BMAT and BeatDAP and all these businesses out there that essentially help licenses happen. They're not perfect. They are pragmatic, and they're extremely helpful to rights holders. So again, make value rather than take it. It's much more fulfilling than, you know, banging your head against a brick wall, I find.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. I know we've got one more question from Toby. I'm not sure how you are for time, Cliff. We can take that one more question, or if you've got to shoot.
All right. Final question was, I just wanted to ask, do you feel like small startups really have a chance getting access to the catalog from the majors? And I know you keep saying, why would you start with the majors? It doesn't make sense. Go start with something else. But realistically, the reason that Udio and Suno are the most popular AI music platforms out there is because they went and got the major record labels catalog and built these models and kind of demonstrated what is possible.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah.
It's pretty obvious. But the main point is,
yeah, but on that point,
you've reiterated that it doesn't make sense to go to the majors, but clearly what is possible works when you get access. Sorry, the best of what's possible happens when you get access to the catalog.
Well, let me.
You think Suno and Udio would have ever had the opportunity to clear those licenses?
Look, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. I met a guy who, they were like, oh, Suno and Udio, they've made all the money, they're attracting all the investment, and I was early into Spotify, and like Spotify, the majors are going to have no chance but to do a deal, no option but to do a deal. They'll have to be brought to heel. I said, oh no, you've forgotten. Spotify was licensed from day one. Do you know who didn't get licenses? Napster, LimeWire, Pirate Bay, Grokster, MP3. None of them got licensed.
So they didn't have $100 million behind them.
Oh, they had more.
You have to understand, when Napster was on the front cover of Time in about 2000, they had like 20 million global users. You take that comparatively today, that's like 200 to 300 million global users. Those were big entities doing a lot of stuff. And there was an offer in those early days to try and do a subscription deal, that was turned down, that didn't happen, and there was a hiatus before the real thing started to grow. And I very much think that's where we are at the moment.
Yeah, it is. So if you're as old as me and Simon, you've seen all this before. So what will happen? But none of those people got licensed. Well, I think, why didn't one of the majors buy it? One of the majors did buy it. BMG bought Napster, and then the others piled in and sued them. So, and there's no reason to do these deals. People are like, oh, do you think they're going to settle? They're going to have to settle, but they ain't going to get licenses.
Yeah.
I think actually we're going to wrap up now, guys. We're about 6 minutes.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. What a great discussion.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Sorry about all the questions.
No, you're good, Toby. Thank you. Yeah. You're welcome anytime. And you can do my job next time. Thank you very much. Really, really appreciate it.